Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on large-scale change, part of the Virtual Academy of Large-Scale Change webinar series. My name is Phil Wainwright. I'm a communications manager in the Sustainable Improvement Team, part of NHS England, and we also have my colleague Claire Potts here helping with this webinar. Today we are really pleased to have with us Allie Wheeler. You will see from her biography on the screen there in front of you that she has vast experience in the public sector over the last 25 years, working on a variety of large-scale change challenges, and she is now the Associate Director of Transformation for the Cheshire West Integrated Care Partnership. It runs off the tongue, that does, but we're really pleased to have Allie Wheeler with us. If I can just say before I hand over to Allie, there will be some plenty of interaction hopefully during this webinar. Apologies if you are new to WebEx, or rather if you know how to use this, but let me just explain. If you can make sure that your chat box is activated, so if you click on the screen, you should have some options, some round boxes at the bottom, and then third from the right there is a speech bubble. If you make sure that that is activated, you should have a chat box in the bottom right of your screen, and then make sure that where it says there's a drop-down menu. If you make sure that that is activated to all participants, and that makes sure that everybody can see your comments throughout the webinar. So without further ado, I will hand over to Allie. Thank you, Allie.
Thank you very much, Phil. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be taking part in this large-scale change webinar again. And just to give you a bit of background, this webinar, I'm introducing the large-scale change model in more detail to you. I'm going to share some of my personal experiences of using that model, and I'm going to show you how I use the large-scale change methodology in action. I believe that large-scale change is learned in action, and give you some very practical examples of it. I took part in the very first Academy for Large-Scale Change 10 years ago, and was privileged to spend a year at that time trialling and testing and applying the large-scale change model to what was a significant challenge at the time, which was an alcohol harm reduction program, which I'm going to share with you. I've gone on to share that learning, share the experiences, and I'm currently working with the NHS SI team in delivering these large-scale change masterclasses and webinars. And I'm currently every day applying the large-scale change model to the work I'm leading on transformational change in Cheshire West Integrated Care Partnership. So I'd really love to hear your experiences of how you are using any change kind of methodology, and I would welcome you to put any questions in the chat box, and when we have sections during this presentation, I'll try and answer those questions, and if I can't today, then happily do that offline as well. So let's see if this is working. There we go. So what am I going to be talking about today? I was really briefly talking about do we have wicked problems that we're all working on, and how can we use the large-scale change model to really help us think through and operationalise our thinking and actions around dealing with those wicked problems. So I'm going to give you an overview of the large-scale change model. I'm then going to show you large-scale change in action and share with you some of my favourite thinking tools, and ask you really which ones you use. I never leave these webinars without learning something new and making new contacts. So I'm really keen for this to be very interactive, and then really share with you some of the core elements that I think are absolutely crucial to leading transformational change. So I hope you'll find this really interesting as we go along. So just to get us started, it's really important to understand whether we have a change project, a change challenge, because there are elements of this that can really help with that, or whether we really are truly working on a very complex and really wicked problem that actually is, and I suppose my thoughts on what is a wicked problem are here on the screen, that wicked problems, which are transformational change problems, often have multiple and competing goals. And certainly the program I'm working on at the moment across an integrated care partnership from all the different organisations, sometimes some of our key performance indicators or outcome measures or regulations actually pull us in different directions. So we do have multiple and competing goals which we need to work through and find, I suppose, a common understanding and trust and risk sharing around that. Why else do I think that wicked problems, transformational challenges are complex? Well, because they're emergent. If we knew today what the solution was tomorrow or in a year or in 10 years' time, we would just write a change program and we would put in place a plan and we would just be getting on with it. But I don't think that complex, wicked, transformational change problems we necessarily know the end point, and that the route to get there is emergent along the way. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. And the most, I suppose, the most exciting but most challenging parts to complex changes are they involve people. It's not just a technological change where we can press a computer key and the change happens overnight. We have people, patients, communities, our workforce, our systems leaders, ourselves as system leaders are all involved in this, and we all have different ways of thinking about change. We all have different values, we all have different motivations, and we need to be absolutely mindful of that, but that makes it really complex, but actually really exciting as well. So that's kind of my overview of the challenges that we are dealing with. So I would really like to know, this is the first interactive bit of all of you out there, and a test of whether you can use WebEx or not. And believe me, when I started using it, I would be flailing around right now. I've got a question to ask you all, and I would like, Claire's going to bring a poll up. Based on the three areas which make transformational change, large-scale change complex, which are multiple and competing goals, it involves people, and we can't necessarily predict the outcome, and it's an emergent. Which one is the most challenging to you right now? So if you could just share your thoughts with me, that would be absolutely brilliant. And then I can use that in the rest of this presentation.
Okay, so on the right-hand side, you should have a number of options, one of which should read polling. And if you make sure that that screen is maximized, you should be able to see the poll question and then get your response. So if you click your answer and then press submit.
Mm-hmm. And this is the bit where I'm supposed to be very patient and count to 20. But if you've ever met me, that will count to about 10. So do you have, are your most challenging areas your competing goals? Does your system-wide change have competing goals? Does it involve people? I would imagine so, but is that your biggest challenge? And do you know where you're going? Do you know all your outcomes, which would be brilliant? Which are your most challenging areas? How are we doing, Phil? Or Claire?
Ali, it's very slow, the system. I don't know if there's a bit of a backlog with the delay, so I'll close the poll now. I think it doesn't state that the correct figures for my end, I don't think, as to what's actually, so I'll close it.
No problem. I think, too, when we've done these WebExes before, we have had a really even split across the three, actually, which is interesting. So I'm sure we can get the figures out after this session of what that poll is. So this WebEx is running quite slowly today, so I do apologise for that. But, and what people have often come on the chat box and said is, actually, all three or two of them are really challenging to me. And you know what? That's what we would expect. So if you are challenged by having multiple and competing goals, and that your systems leaders, are all across different organisations, and you're covering wider organisations and communities and people and patients, and you don't know where you're necessarily going yet or what the outcome's going to be, you're involved in complex, large-scale change. So that's just, okay, we'll move on. So let's talk about what is large-scale change, where does it come from, and what does it look like? So it was originally developed by the NHS Institute about It says on there 7 years ago. It's around about 10 years ago now, and like I said, I was really privileged and really enjoyed going on the very first Academy for Large Scale Change. The guide in the last 18 months has been refreshed, and there's a link there for you to get onto the guide. And what I would say is that there's a huge amount of evidence in there about how the transformational change, large scale change model has been used and how effective it is, and lots of hyperlinks to lots and lots of other thinking tools. It's an umbrella of social system change models, and it's a thinking tool. It absolutely isn't a roadmap to get you from A to B. It's not. It couldn't be further away, actually, from a print to program delivery. It's a cycle of changes that are very unpredictable, but all the tools under there are thinking tools to really help you analyse and understand the complex change that you've got. And also there, on the last bullet point, there is a YouTube clip to an animation of what large-scale change in the model can do for you. So it's been around for some time, but talking to one of the original authors of the large-scale change model, Paul Pleasiconi, a few weeks ago, it is equally as valid now as it was when it was created. In fact, probably more pertinent to the current complex system we're working in. So what do we mean by large-scale change? So we have this river metaphor, and it basically talks about what is the wow factor of change, and it uses the metaphor of a river running through a village, and that's in the guide, in the original guide, and I've updated it a little bit because I think it's really important we all have our own metaphor for large-scale change. So my picture and my metaphor for large-scale change is a picture taken from the International Space Station from Chris Hadfield. I tweeted him about it, and I thought it was superb. So this is a picture of Winnipeg in Canada in the snow. So it's black and white, but what it shows you is the enormity of the city of Winnipeg. And it shows you down the middle there, which looks like a long worm, the river running through it. And then if you look to the right of it, you have got a wider meandering water diversion system. And basically, so what do we mean by large-scale change? So let's imagine that Winnipeg, many, many years ago, was a small village, and it had an ambition to grow. It had an ambition to build schools and community centres and grow into a city centre with huge shopping malls and big industrial areas and big economic areas and areas of growth. It just needed to grow and grow and grow. To have that vision of that would have taken the agreement, I imagine, of a huge number of organisations, a huge amount of engagement with the people that lived in Winnipeg, and it would have been something that wasn't going to be achieved overnight. In fact, it could have taken years, possibly 10 years, maybe 5 years. And if you live in Winnipeg and you lived through that, you might be fearful. You might be excited. You might say, I've lived here all my life, I don't want it to change. You might say, I'm really looking forward to what the new opportunities are going to be bringing. You might start to see cranes going up and road diversions, and you might be inconvenienced, but you might be excited. You might start to go to a new school that's emerged early on before the big city centre, green areas have been opened. So, but if you've never been to Winnipeg, or you had originally lived in Winnipeg and you came back after 5 years and this was all complete, you would go, wow. This is brilliant, this is different, but you would never have felt the incremental lots and lots of changes along the way. So that's the metaphor in my mind of large-scale change. It has wow factor. It has fundamentally changed something into something different, and it can be chaotic along the way, but it has required lots and lots and lots and lots of incremental changes that lots of people have reacted to differently, but have all added up to one big large-scale change. So that's the metaphor that we use. And then there are 3 dimensions that we talk about of large-scale change. And these axes of change, again, these are thinking tools rather than, I suppose, analytic or tools. So the arrows, they are asking you and encouraging you to think and push your large-scale change thinking further down the arrow. The further down the arrow towards the tip you go, the bigger, the better, the bolder, the more opportunity your large-scale change model and challenge might have, but there isn't a right or wrong. So the size of large-scale change may be huge geographical footprint. So the current footprint I'm working on is on Cheshire West, previous one I've worked on is the whole of the Northwest, and I've worked on UK-wide transformational change programs. However, I've also worked on one, or worked with one, that's been a maternity unit in an acute trust. So the size is really important to think about. But if it was, the one with the maternity trust was start with one incremental change in that maternity trust with the ambition to change all maternity services across a geographical area and across the UK, and that's what it did. So you can start small but think big. Pervasiveness. Does your large-scale change challenge affect a small portion of the system or a whole portion of the system? If it's a small portion, that might be your challenge, and that might be massive because it's just really hard work and it's very complex and you can't predict the outcome. But will it grow? Can it grow? Can you push your thinking to say, okay, we'll do it in this one area now, but how can we grow and share the learning? And then the depth of changing the behaviour of the people who are affected by or affecting the change is probably one of the most powerful and the bit that makes your change so sustainable. But we're talking about changing potentially intergenerational, institutional behaviours that have been in ground for years. So that is a real challenge. So the more your change programme is really challenging behaviours of how organisations, staff and communities work, the bigger your large-scale change effort will be. It's really good to look at what large-scale change isn't so we understand what it is. So large-scale change isn't just about, this is my analogy again, rearranging the deck chairs on Blackpool Beach. I live in the Northwest, I've done some work in Blackpool, I love this analogy. It's not just about rearranging structures. If we just move the deck chairs on Blackpool Beach to face a different direction, to get more sun or to fit more chairs in, but we do it because of a directive from a new, tourism director, and we don't do the whole process change alongside it. We don't give the people who move the deck chairs the equipment and the direction in how to move those deck chairs. And if we don't actually talk to the tourists about why we're moving the deck chairs, or the deck chair attendant, or those people that have been going to, and sitting on the same deck chair in the same row for 25 years about why we're doing this, we will have massive resistance to our change. So let's not just rearrange the deck chairs by structures alone. Let's not just rearrange the deck chairs through process alone, or just create new pathways of care without looking at the structures that need to underpin that, and importantly, how that's going to affect the people who are using those pathways, both staff and patients as well. And let's not attempt to just alter behaviours without addressing structures and processes as well. So you have to do all three. You have to do structures, process and behaviour change. If you just do one of those alone or two of those alone, you are likely to have a failed or run out of energy large-scale change very, very quickly. The evidence is really clear you need to do all three. The one we usually shy away from is the behaviours, and that is the one that makes change sustainable way beyond you and I as leaders, and the change in the time that it's going to take. We'll talk a bit more about this shortly. So let's move on. I'd like to know how you're feeling. Have you got any questions? Have you got any thoughts on what we're saying? Have you got any ideas? I don't know if you've got any yet, Phil, or we will have more question and answer going down.
So we've had a bit of an issue with the chat box in that people haven't yet been able to post to all participants, but that should be fixed now. So if anybody has any questions or comments, please give that a go and put them in the chat box, and we'll see how we go on.
Yeah, let's move on then and use more time at the end for Q&A, which would be really helpful. So I'd love now to introduce you to what is called the Emergent Model of large-scale change. It's emergent because it's going to show you that your change, your challenge, your complex transformational change, it emerges along the way. There are two ways of talking about the large-scale change model. We have a working word definition. So if you're a word person, you will probably go mad because this is the longest sentence there ever is, but that will explain what large-scale change is. If you are a visual person like me, here is the model, and we go on to that very shortly. But let's talk about the word definition. So large-scale change is an emergent process. So we have a plan, but we don't have an absolute tied-down, financially and resourced and outcomes-directed plan. Of course, all those things are hugely important and are a consideration and will be in other areas of your planning. But we don't necessarily know what all the really brilliant, innovative things that we need to do that's going to achieve our large-scale change vision. So it's an emergent process, and it's about moving a large collection of individuals, people, our workforce, our community, people, groups, our teams, our workforce teams, our groups that are in communities, and organisations, so multiple organisations involved in your change, I imagine, towards the vision. It's so important to have a vision, for people to know where they're going. Now, we can get stuck on vision, that it doesn't have all the right words and it's not 3 sentences long. A vision should be very simple, and it should explain where you need to be. All the detail under it doesn't mean it's a vision. The vision is a fundamentally new future state. So some examples are tobacco-free futures, the one that we worked on, which was alcohol-free Northwest, drink-wise Northwest, free from alcohol harm, or let's end TB, full stop. So some really simple, punchy positions where and futures where people need to get to. And we achieve our vision by identifying key themes, high-level key themes, big pieces of work that all have big pieces of work underneath them, big activities, lots and lots of things that when they are all delivered, achieve your large-scale change. So we have big key themes that we get people working on. And when I mean people working on them, that's when we talk about distributed leadership here in this sentence. So this is about setting 1,000 blossoms blooming, 1,000 leaders, however many people are in your system, they all need to be seen as, be engaged as, be inspired to be distributed leaders of the change that you are involved in. And it's about creating massive and active engagement of key stakeholders. So if there are people out there delivering a service today that is contributing to your large-scale challenge, they are a key stakeholder or a distributed leader for your change. So it's that analogy of who put the man on the moon. Well, it was the person that was cleaning the floor, that made sure that no dust went into the rocket launcher, which made sure that that rocket took off and put a man on the moon. So everybody is contributing, wherever they are in the system, to delivering and driving and emerging your large-scale change. And it's about mutually reinforcing changes across multiple systems, process, and attitudes, beliefs, and behaviours. So there you've got to do this, reinforcing the change across multiple systems, processes, and behaviours all at the same time. So that's the working definition. Let's go on to the model. So if you're a picture person, hopefully this is helpful to you. So first of all, you can see that this isn't a linear model. It's a cyclical model. And you start in the top left-hand corner, and you identify the need for change. Now, this can often come from a mandate from a leader, a government directive. It can often come from a social movement. It doesn't matter where it comes from. And actually, the initial need might change and adapt in this emergent large-scale change along the way. But you've got a need for change. So that's turned into a vision. And then what you do, you go down the arrows and you go into your framing and reframing. What I want to say at this stage is framing and reframing and reframing and reframing. What does that mean? Why, who, what, the stories. Why are you doing the change that you are doing? You cannot spend enough time on framing and reframing, and you should be constantly framing and reframing throughout your large-scale change, whether that be for a month or a year or 10 years. You've got to continually refreshing the story. Because if you've got to talk to 1,000 people, there will be 1,000 ways of doing it. Now that might sound overwhelming, but start with small, incremental frames that attract initial interest, and then you'll start hearing the frames coming out from people. So leaders will start saying, the public will start saying, your workforce will start telling you why they're doing this, what they're doing, and that can all be turned into framing. It's the reasons why you're doing the change. And using those framings, you engage and connect with your distributed leaders. And then you ask them, you engage them, you work with them to start making the pragmatic lots and lots of changes in order to get your change going. Now, quite often, you have to go backwards to go forwards with large-scale change. So if you're at the beginning of your large-scale change process, you might already be seeing lots of pragmatic changes out there. Certainly the program that I'm just involved in, people have been doing integrated care for a long, long time. This isn't new. Integrated care teams have been out there for a long, long time. So it's about starting there and saying, okay, what's the great stuff that's happening? how do we grow that? Let's engage more people. Let's grow and build the social movement for self-care. How are we going to attract people? That's your framing. So once you know what your framing is to attract people, for example, to around self-care, then you start to engage maybe the public and more patients, and then you can start working on them with pragmatic change. So to go forward, you often have to go backwards in your thinking. And in large-scale change, you go round and round that middle circle many, 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 many times. It could be for a month, it could be for a year. For example, the large-scale change program that I initially led, it was for 7 years. So, you know, that we didn't know at the beginning it was going to last 7 years. And we plateaued and lots of things along the way, which I'll talk about. But that's the challenges, the complex challenges we're dealing with. You know that you've got a successful, necessary large-scale change if you keep attracting interest. And how do you keep attracting interest? By introducing new frames and new frames. So then let's see what happens. So after some time, and we don't know how long that is, there are 3 possible outcomes. Your large-scale change runs out of energy, which probably means that it was initially set up on the back of a wrong motivation, a wrong mandate, not with the right resources. And your large-scale change plateaus. So I think this is a positive place to be. Let's take a breath. Let's allow some pilots and some test beds to bed in. Things are going to have to wait for a while. The alcohol harm reduction program that I led plateaued for 2 years, whilst the system around it caught up, and then it suddenly emerged again now. And really interestingly, there are new people and new leaders working on it, which is absolutely right. What it is that is a measure that your original large-scale change was really complex and absolutely necessary. And then the last possible outcome is what you're doing is become a sustainable norm. You've embedded the changes that you want to, and actually it's become everyday business, and people's behaviour have changed, and the systems and processes are just working brilliantly. And then sometimes we live with the consequences. Positive, brilliant, things have changed, they carry on way beyond you as a systems leader, or they're not so positive, and you have to set up a new large-scale change programme to fix them. And a great example of that for me that I've lived through was working on alcohol harm reduction and the introduction of 24-hour licensing in, I think it was 2007, which was going to economically change the world and was going to create this cafe culture. And what it did is it just created far more opportunities for people to have access to really cheap alcohol. So those who we hadn't engaged or spoken to and helped them change and support their behaviour change actually were more vulnerable. So that's why we have to introduce the alcohol harm reduction program. So there can be negative consequences of what are good ideas at the start. Right, here's an interactive bit. Let's hope it's working. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to use the arrow bar, and Phil might explain it better than me, the arrow annotation, and stick an arrow on which part of the large-scale change model you are currently working on. Can we do that? Is that working,
yeah.
Phil?
Certainly working for me. So let me just explain. If you move your yes, it's working. We're getting some coming in. So if you move your mouse over towards the left-hand side of the screen, you should see a number of options in a bar on the left-hand side. There's a squiggle, which is second down. If you click on that, you will then have an arrow option at the top on the left, and then you should be able to select your option.
Superb. So first of all, it's lovely that you're all out there and you're interacting, which means I hope you're enjoying the presentation, and hopefully some questions are popping up. So what's brilliant is that that's showing that some people are right at the beginning of their change programs because they're at the start of identifying the need for change. Lots of you are currently working on framing and reframing. I can't say enough really how long I would encourage you to stay there and really think about the head, heart and guts messages that you need to tap into to frame and reframe to attract, make your large-scale change effort attractive. Lots of you are doing engagement with key stakeholders. That's brilliant. A few of you are starting to do pragmatic changes, and then a few of you are saying that you are in the settling in process. Some running out of energy, maybe, depends where the arrow's gone, some plateauing and some going into sustainable norm. Brilliant. I think that you can go all over that model at all times. What I would say is that if you are settling in and you are running out of energy or plateauing, the way to get out of that is to go back into the heart of that model and think about your framing, think about who you need to engage that isn't already engaged, and think about what different changes that you can make. So I encourage you to stay in the heart of that model for as long as possible. And when you start to see pragmatic changes coming out, it starts to get really exciting. So thank you for that. Do you want to clear that, Phil, and we can move on? Or Claire?
Yeah, Claire, are you able to clear that, please?
Okay, I'll just move on. So, okay, so the reality is different from the ideal. We know this. Evidence is really clear, and these statistics are statistics that I use, and I've heard some more recently, I think, from a Harvard review. So we know evidence says that 33% of change projects fail, 33% meet some of their objectives, and 33% of them meet all of them. And the reason, let me just see, I need to, yes. And the reason for that is because we know some of the challenges that we're facing today. You know, we're working in this, and it's different than it was 10 years ago. I'm going to be completely honest about that. In fact, I've felt it'd be different in the last year. And but what we are seeing and hearing, and I'm certainly seeing and hearing, is more success and less running out of energy. And I think that's because as system leaders, we're using large-scale change thinking and methodologies, whatever tools you decide to use, but it's the thinking. So I think we are seeing some real shift change in what we are achieving. But what we do know is that we do have increasing demands. There is less money and there are less resources. There is, you know, I suppose we are suffering a history of patchy change, failed change. People don't like the word change, do they? When I led the first large-scale change challenge I did, we specifically called it a challenge and not a change, because people have been working on it for years before we even came along. So if we'd have come along and said, we're leading this great change, that would have upset probably 80% of our key stakeholders, because they'd have said, well, you just go ahead and lead it then, because don't recognise that we've been doing it for a while. So we didn't do that, because that was the totally wrong thing to do. We called everybody into a challenge. And the great work that had been going on out there, therefore, was all called up to step up, let's do something together. We know there's a shift from our focus from organisation to whole system, but actually that's never been more challenging than before, I think, because it's really challenging to think that your organisation is going to change, it's going to morph into something new, it's going to collaborate, it's going to merge across a whole system. But we're looking at whole system change now. And there is a recognition that transformation requires different skills and approaches, and it takes time, hence being on this webinar, I think. So we know why large-scale change doesn't work. So I reviewed about 5 years ago 40 large-scale change programs, and a good 80% of them had either run out of energy or plateaued within the first 6 months. And this was my evidence that I pulled together as to why. Large-scale change doesn't work because your need for change has no mandate, possibly because it's a whim, or it's a one leader's idea rather than a whole system idea, or it doesn't have the mandate because you haven't framed it right yet. So that's why I say work on the framing, because it's so important. Get that mandate, get that permission, get that swell of need behind you, and you will fly a lot easier than really fighting a system. It doesn't have the leadership. So we are systems leaders. You're on this webinar. Where are your other systems leaders? Personal resilience for large-scale change is so important. Surround yourself by good and positive and equal thinking systems leaders. You need leadership and distributed leadership. You don't have the right resources. So many of the programs that I talked to, they were leading large-scale change above and beyond their day job. So they weren't either seeing it or able to do it as their day job, or it was above and beyond. And also resources, you are going to need massive comm support on this. You are going to need administrative support, really, really important. You are going to need potentially project management office. You are going to need resources. In the current program I'm working on, we've got distributed resources coming from different organisations across the system, which is a measure of the commitment from all the organisations to work together. But it also recognises that we, as a very small PMO office, do not have all the skills and resources. So you're going to need resources. No landing pad. Where does this sit? Is it sitting in a new team? Is it sitting in a directorate? Where does this belong? Who is hosting your large-scale change effort? And I think this is a really most important one, no patience. So this is going to take time. I don't know how long your large-scale change is going to take. I have no idea how long the current work I'm involved in is going to take. But you need patience, and you need to encourage those around you to support the patience that is required. And then you will have a polarity of views on this. You will have people saying, let's just get on with it, do something, I need to see something. And yes, you need to be mindful of that. And actually, people do need to see something tangible to build trust and understanding with you. But you need to also work with them for them to understand that the big whole system, large-scale change could take a lot longer. So share incremental challenges and opportunities and outcomes really early on to feed those that are less patient than you need at that moment in time. So that's really important. So how do we work with that? What can you do differently? So ask yourself, what can I do differently? What can you do differently going forward? How do you work across systems? Some of this thinking will definitely help you. What tools and techniques can you use to really help you? And I hope the ones I'm going to share with you will do. And who can help you? This cannot be you on your own. It's going to be too big, too complex. You need all those points on the side. You need those 5 points on the side to be your key ingredients to successful large-scale change. So these are some of the tools you will learn about in the large-scale change program: driver diagrams, stakeholder analysis tools, momentum gathering tools, and leadership tools. This is the interaction bit again. I would love you to annotate again. Can you put an arrow on the screen of what the tool of which tools you are currently using and finding most helpful in your large-scale change program? Is that going to work, Phil?
Okay, so same tool as last time, if you can find the arrow on the left-hand side. There we go.
Superb, that's working, that's great. So I'm going to explain these tools briefly, just to show you some examples of them, but you will work on them and you will use them in your large-scale change program, especially if you join the masterclasses of large-scale change. So, and in the large-scale change guide that I referred to earlier, there are really good and clear explanations of all these tools. They are thinking tools. They're definitely not communicating tools. They are tools to help you think, and with great hyperlinks to other NHS resources. So, some of you using driver diagrams. Driver diagrams are tree diagrams, logic models, which actually show you a very high-level route of what you're going to need to do and activities and actions to achieve your change. I would encourage you to link those to outcomes if you can. That gets you more support, but it's not absolutely necessary. Stakeholder analysis, I am so glad that there's so many arrows on that. We rarely spend enough time doing stakeholder analysis, and actually the more time we spend on analysing and understanding our stakeholders, what are they thinking, feeling, seeing and doing about the large-scale change effort you are leading, the more you'll be able to frame and reframe and ask them to do the right thing and get the right people doing the right job, because you really understand your stakeholders. So glad so many of you are using those tools. If you haven't, I would really encourage you to find out about them. Creating momentum tools. How do we operationalize a driver diagram? How do we operationalize a delivery plan? It is so difficult sometimes to get a action into activity, and there are lots of tools that you can help with that. And I personally are just introducing into our new program PDSA cycles. That probably is an acronym that people, not everybody across the partnership understands. So tests for change, that call them whatever you like, whatever tool you use, reframe it to whatever works with your system. And then leadership tools. Systems leaders require an authentic leadership, in my view, and it's a different type of thinker. And I think there are brilliant tools out there to help us identify and support leaders through this difficult change. So thank you very much for that, and I hope that's been useful. So here's an example of a driver diagram. It's with a Tobacco-Free Futures program I worked with a great number of years ago now, about 7 years ago now. And it's just a really good example of how you can have a very clear 10-year vision. Sometimes that's too much for people, so we broke it down into a 1-year vision. And then these primary drivers, these are those key things. These are the big pieces of work. And if you've ever worked on prevention or lifestyle challenges, you know any of those, you know that each of those boxes alone are huge pieces of work, which have got underneath them lots and lots of huge projects to get them to deliver. But what it gives you is a high-level overview of your program. Here are some of the stakeholder analysis tools that we use. They are absolutely superb. I cannot encourage you enough to use these, and we use these at the masterclasses in large-scale change. And these are some of the great tools, well, just two of the great tools to help you create momentum. Plan in 30, 60, 90 days rather than quarterly meetings. That's the tradition that we work in, and it's really unhelpful. And if you're planning in 30, 60, 90-day cycles of change, use the two-step down thinking tool. So if we're looking for a change to happen in 3 years, what are we going to do in the next 3 months, in the next 3 weeks to get going and actually do some activities to achieve that 3-year vision? This has helped you really get going with momentum. Also really challenges people's mindsets, and it's that mindset shift which creates a different type of leadership. So these are really good tools. And, you know, that leadership, the leadership required for large-scale change is about role modelling. Be the change you wish to see, is what Gandhi said. Look in the mirror when you're frustrated with people because they're just not getting the change that you are involved in. It's not that they don't get it, it's just that we've not framed it right yet. That was one of the biggest lessons that I learned in the very first academy. Got frustrated. I remember walking out of meetings and going, they just don't get it. And actually, we hadn't framed it right. We hadn't said the right things to motivate the people to do the right things. So leadership, role modelling, having that personal narrative is really important. So in the next few minutes, I'm just going to share with you large-scale change in action through an example that a program that I led, and then we'll go on to some questions. So DrinkWise Northwest was established by the by Department of Health 10 years ago now. I was seconded to set it up from the police service, which was a completely different kind of leadership model and a completely different service. And I was really lucky to have a team, a great advocacy and communications lead who come from the third sector, Hazel Parsons, and two great project support officers who just really knew the system. We had a vision to create a safer, healthier Northwest free from alcohol harm. Nobody can argue with that. Doesn't necessarily say any more. I mean, some days I like the word partnership in it. Believe me, we had about 3 days working on this. We reframed that after 5 years. Safer, healthier communities free from alcohol harm. We did that because we'd moved on from working with services to working with communities as advocates for change. So your vision doesn't have to last forever, but it needs to just say where you're going. And these were the first distributed leaders. You can see there were some huge organisations in there. If I showed you a map of the logos of the distributed leaders we had after 7 years, it would be a screen full. And most of the people would be just pictures of people and the public. So these are your distributed leaders. So we were working with 5 police forces, 5 fire services, national organisations, 24 local authorities, primary care trusts at the time. You know, they were all distributed leaders of our work and our change. This is our first framing. It hadn't been done before, so the Northwest was the first to set this up, and eventually it went across the UK, so this was really great work done by the systems leaders. Another thing is about role modelling and leadership for large-scale change, never claim the change that you've done, because that turns people off. This was put together by a huge team of people who were working as distributed leaders under DrinkWise's kind of umbrella. And, you know, this was some of our team's great work. But what we could see for the first time is how much was alcohol costing us in the Northwest. And we could see not only was it costing an individual £439 a year. So if you think about how much we reframed this many times, how much we spend on a holiday or how much we spend on our council taxes, it was at the time, it's a huge amount per person. And we were bigger than the England average. And then what we could show was we broke it down into our sub-regions. But actually Lancashire, which was quite unusual, was costing us the most in terms of harm. Then another reframing was, because that was brilliant for systems leaders, but what does that mean for staff and for the public? So we took a family and we plotted their interactions with alcohol harm over a year. So here you've got mother, 3 sons, daughter, 14, pregnant, conceived whilst under the influence of alcohol. This work was led by a great a team in Salford and Salford Royal Hospital. It was brilliant. What you see there is the yellow are universal interventions, the blue are targeted planned interventions, and the red are chaotic, complex, costly interventions. And what we could see when we really broke this down is that on 1 or 2 or 3 days in that whole year, This family had 3 or 4 visits from a part of the system about an alcohol-related issue, and we weren't talking to each other about it. That family assumed that we were. That family assumed that all services share information. They presume that there's one button and tells you everything, and we know that's not the case. But so impactfully, as an infographic, that shows us that family's targeted and planned interventions for their alcohol harm isn't working, because they are calling 999, they are racking up at A&E, they are in the doctor's surgery, they are in probation services, a huge amount of time. But we had to transfer that into something that would engage counsellors and systems leaders again and other organisations. So we took the cost of that family over a year and we split it around what we would call a health and wellbeing board now. So that got people sitting up and going, right, so we're all sharing the cost, but we're not sharing the cost around what we need to do. So it's costing us, all over the system, it's costing us money, but actually what are we doing about it as a collective? So that was another powerful reframing. And then this was another powerful reframing because we showed that actually 80% of the costs were reactive. So when we're trying to reduce costs and reduce demand and reduce resources, we're not doing enough in the blue to reduce the red. So housing, health and police all were affected by the chaotic life of this, very vulnerable and challenging family. Another reframing. And we reframed it lots and lots of time. We talked about personal leadership. We reframed in Alcohol Awareness Week, how much do we each drink? How much do we spend on entertaining clients on alcohol? We talked about how much alcohol contributes to suicide and worklessness. There's the polarities of it. So framing and reframing is really important. This was our first driver diagram. The reason I share this is because we had about 5 iterations of a driver diagram because it's an emergent program. So your driver diagram that you create today won't be the same in 5 years' time or in 5 months' time. But what we never really changed were those 5 primary drivers. And what this driver diagram shows is primary driver 4, which was around what we were going to do to help young people and prevent alcohol harm to them. We didn't know. And the reason we didn't know is we did know that, there was work happening with young people and alcohol harm reduction, of course there was, but we didn't know what strategically and system-wide we needed to do. And it wasn't until 5 years did we find the right leader to do that. So each of these primary drivers had a local authority or acute trust chief exec championing them. But it took us quite some time, because children were a priority and people weren't a priority at that time, there were other things that we needed to do first. And so after 5 years, we were able to fill that gap. But what we never did is we never took that primary driver off. We didn't hide it. In fact, we used it as a lever, because we were saying, why aren't we prioritising young people? Where are the leaders for our young people? So actually, gaps in our large-scale change programs and actually promoting them can be really, really helpful. And I would encourage you to show the gaps in resources, in opportunity, in innovation and in leadership, because it's a call to action then. So this is another framing, and this is how we attracted our leaders and our distributed leaders for young people. So we were Drinkwise Northwest Free from Alcohol Harm, and then we created a campaign, Let's Look Again at Alcohol. Alcohol and childhood don't mix. When are we teaching our children to drink? So can you hear the 3 frames there? So let's look again at alcohol. That was our strapline. Alcohol and childhood don't mix. And what was the last one? I can't remember now. My mind's gone. But the evidence we had behind this was things like alcohol tombolas as fundraisers in schools. And actually, that was on when do we teach our children to drink? And it's not that we want to be down on PTAs and how hard they work for fundraising. And it's not that we don't say that 99% of those adults in the Christmas fair wouldn't choose to drink alcohol responsibly. It's the message we're saying when we see a child running across the school hall with a bottle of wine in hand that's cost them 50p in a tombola, saying, Mummy, look what I've won for you. Aren't you pleased with me? It's the whole association of when did we teach our children to drink. That was the campaign that we ran, and it was very successful, and that allowed us to fill in that part of the driver diagram. I'm sure we could debate that more, but it was really interesting. Okay, so this is alcohol and childhood don't mix. Our policy calls, this is what we were calling for: minimum unit price, restrictions on alcohol marketing, and public health as the fifth licensing something objective, I'll put my teeth in, I'm sorry, never changed from the ones at the very beginning. So we were just reframing what we wanted people to do, and the response nationally to achieve that would be to have those 3 policy decisions in place. And you will, if you work in this agenda area, you will know that minimum unit price is rearing, is coming out of the woodwork again, which is really interesting. So I thought it was just good to share. You were reframing after 5 years, which got us to attract the interest into the work that we needed to do. There we go. So these are some of the programs that I've either worked on or supported or coached, and basically you can see that the visions are really quite clear. That I'm showing you here different examples of driver diagrams, and that you can use the tools to really map out what you're trying to achieve. So what are my top tips before we go into Q&A? My top tips: create space and time for the preparatory work that you need to do to lead a successful and sustainable large-scale change program. Stay in that preparatory phase for as long as possible, even when you're desperately being pulled into, let's get activity happening. The preparatory work are those 5 bullets about getting the right mandate, getting the right leadership, getting the right resources, getting the right landing pad, where are you, and ensuring that people understand that this isn't going to be achieved overnight, and the framing, frame, and reframe. Ensure there is fertile ground for change. That's my analogy, really. Fertile ground is, does everybody involved really want this to happen? Is the mood, is the action, are the behaviours really showing you that your vision is absolutely fertile and ripe and ready to go? Large-scale change is so reliant on people. I've said this absolutely really recently in a workshop. People, us, our systems leaders, our public, our workforce will make or break our large-scale change efforts. And they will do that because they either don't believe in it, don't trust it, don't understand it, haven't been involved in it. So you need to engage stakeholders and the public throughout your large-scale change, because they can absolutely make it happen. And quite often, many of the large-scale change efforts I've been involved in, the public have had such a groundswell of ask that the organisations haven't been able to keep up with it, and therefore they've gone off and done their own thing. True social movement for change and community development can often come out of a great large-scale change effort. And I believe that large-scale change is learned in action. So you're not going to pick up a book and read it and apply it. It's not that easy. When you feel it, it's incredible. It's energizing. It can also be really draining when you're feeling it going the wrong way. So that personal resilience is really important. But you learn it. When you frame and it works, it really energizes you to say, let's find another framing, let's find another framing. When you see pragmatic changes and your test of change starting to happen and your opportunity to grow them, your distributed leaders are saying, we want to do this, it's really quite special. So what I would suggest that you could do next is find out what your analogy for your large-scale change effort is, like my Blackpool one, so that you can say to people, the reason we're doing this is so we don't rearrange the deck chairs just through systems and structures. We'll rearrange the deck chairs on our beach because the public want us to rearrange the deck chairs, and then we'll put the systems and the processes in to make that happen. So find your own analogy for large-scale change. Do you have a picture, a metaphor, the story of what the large-scale change will look like? So we are creating care communities in our Cheshire West Integrated Care Partnership. We are currently working on picture metaphors and memes and lots of different communications of what those care communities look like. But we're not going to do that to those communities. We are going to do it with our communities. So our communities will have a totally different view and their own view, and so they should, on what care communities look like. And I probably think they won't even be called care communities. They'll call them whatever they like. And, let's help talk about large-scale change. These two really help you talk about large-scale change. So what is going to be your 30-day action following this webinar? And I'm going to open it up to questions now. Phil, have you got some themes of questions that we can talk about?
Yeah, so we have had some questions from earlier on. There were 2 or 3 questions that came in around the topic of behaviour change and the importance of behaviour change, and a comment from Lynn Winstanley about how behaviour change can often, play second fiddle to structural changes and chasing targets and so on. And Tom Warner asking, what are your positive tips for changing behaviours? So I don't know if you'd like to say anything about that.
Thank you both. Lynn, lovely to have you on the webinar. I couldn't agree more with Lynn. I think we're frightened of tackling behaviours, and I think we do play second fiddle to it. I had a light bulb moment when I went on the original Academy Large-Scale Change, and I remember ringing up my boss at the time, and remember I was a police officer very much from a command and control background, and I said, guess what? Change involves people, and they have hearts and minds, and actually they can make or break change, and it's absolutely true. And the behaviours of how people resist or respond to your change is crucial. So we will have system behaviours, leadership behaviours, but we'll have public behaviours, and to ignore them is to the detriment, because everybody thinks and acts differently. And what I would say is that the way to really understand behaviour change is to engage people in your change. So co-creation, I know that's a bit of a buzzword, but we often do consultation and we don't realise we're doing it. Co-creation is being really brave. It requires brave leadership and it takes time. So we're about to go out in the Integrated Care Partnership to do an appreciative inquiry across our 9 care communities. They're community conversations where we're going to take a number of weeks to find the hidden, unheard and unspoken voices in communities, and I suppose engage, inspire and then enrage those members of the community to really tell us how they can work and share and create care communities. So you need to find not the unusual suspects rather than those that sit at the front of the meeting all the time to create this social movement for change. But behaviour change comes from engaging people and their head, heart and guts as to why they would make a difference. And it's often not a statistic or a cost. It's often the fact that my dad had an operation cancelled a number of weeks back because of, a delay in the system caused by people turning up at A&E and A&E admissions. Well, saying that makes no difference to me at all, but because I don't understand the A&E admissions. So you need to reframe that by saying, a story about why A&E was so cluttered and why people can't be admitted to hospital. But the framing is that's why your dad's operation was cancelled, not because it was costing the system more money. That doesn't interest me when I'm waiting for an operation or I'm looking after, somebody or caring for somebody. So frame to people's heads, hearts and guts values. That's how you change behaviour. Any other questions, Phil?
We had a question about shared vision and how important is shared vision. Some large-scale change visions aren't necessarily supported by everyone and by key stakeholders, and that's from Jane Fox.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I would agree, and what we would have traditionally done is spent years trying to get the right vision to engage everybody. I would say go with the willing, and if you've ever watched the WebEx about Stiver's Dancing Man, it's the lone nut and the first follower that makes a successful transformational change, and at the end of it, those that don't follow you will be the lone nut. So you're never going to have the vision that fits all. You just can't, and some people won't be ready for change, so they will resist. So don't fight that. Don't wait for 20 hands to go up in the boardroom. Go with the 10 that have gone up. And then because those that are resistant and may not agree with your vision or be ready for your vision, need to probably build more trust and understanding up with you and need to see some pragmatic changes happen before they do that. So go with the willing. Don't try and please everybody and really keep your vision very simple. I have all the time, in all the changes that I've been involved in, people say, I don't understand what the vision means. And I actually think that's because they're not ready, because they can't see it themselves. Because I could give so many stories and people will still say, I don't understand what that means. Well, they need to come up with their own analogy. They need to come up with their own Blackpool or Winnipeg. And they will do that when they're ready for the change. So I hope that's helpful. Phil, any more?
I'm afraid I think that's probably all we've got time for today. Okay. But if people have any burning questions, are they able to get in touch with you, Ali?
Yes, and I'm on Twitter at WheelyAl, WheelyAl, or Twitter at Cheshire West ICP, or email is allie.wheeler@nhs.net. So get in touch. I'd like to meet more people working on large-scale change.
Great, thank you very much, Ali, for that insightful presentation, and I hope everyone's got some takeaways from that you can go and hopefully put into practice. Thank you very much, Ali. If you could pass the ball back to me, Ali, I will just move on to the final slides. Here we are. Great. Okay, so you may or may not be aware of our collaboration space that we have online on NHS networks for the Virtual Academy of Large Scale Change. This is where we share previous webinar recordings that you can access on there, and documents that will be of use to you, and resources, and is a handy place to share and network with other people working on large scale change. The web link is there. Claire, if I can just ask you to put that in the chat box so people can have a direct link to that, that'd be great. And you will need to be a member of NHS Networks and sign up if you are not already a member, so you need to just sign up for an account on there and apply to join, and we will let you into the NHS Networks collaboration space. So what's coming next? This is part of a series, and next week we are glad to welcome Catherine Pereira from the NHS Horizons team, who is going to be talking to us about mobilising and organising for change. And the links are in the chat box. If you look at Claire's posts there, you will see the one for next week. You can register using the link that Claire has posted in the chat box there. So we hope you can make it next Thursday at 12:30 to 1:30. And it just remains for me to say thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.